Hello. Today I will be making a commentary on another Royal Navy cruiser, in this case the Leander, the T6. Now, as I said in the earlier commentary on the Fiji, I think that this line truly starts to shine at the Fiji, but around at the Leander it starts to, well, become decent. It's a bit debatable. Like, you can have bad games in the Leander, but you can also have quite enjoyable games in the ship, because for the first time your AP actually has somewhat consistent penetration, and in general you actually have these dual turrets, which mean you can bring 8 guns to bear for the first time, instead of being stuck with these single turrets that don't really deal a lot of damage, and you're generally stuck with whittling down the opponent very slowly, instead of actually just hard punishing someone and killing them off quickly. This matchmaking, of course, as you saw, placed me against mostly T7s, because sadly that's pretty much the case ever since 0.5.9. You're consistently going to be facing, if you're T5 you're going to face T7s, and if you're T6, well, it's anything from 5 to 8. Usually it's around this that you face mostly 7s. That's, I found, the recent most usual stuff. Sometimes you end up against T8s, which is of course not very fun. Especially on the Royal Navy cruisers, this isn't very fun, because the Royal Navy cruisers scale exceptionally badly against higher tiers. Now, the reason for this is, of course, that other cruisers have HE available to them, which naturally means they have fires available to them, and fires deal a percentage damage, so it doesn't matter if they're shooting a T7 battleship, the fire will deal a percentage damage, which will compensate for the lack of damage by having this scaling damage. Now, the Royal Navy cruisers of course have no such thing. They only have their AP to rely on, which is of course rather awkward. Luckily, as I said, at this Leander, your AP starts to actually deal a significant amount of damage and being quite useful. You also have access to torpedoes. They are 8 kilometers, I think, on this ship. You don't have too many of them, but they can come in useful at times. This Nuremberg is... I don't know what he's doing. He's pursuing out. Maybe I can give him a helpful little nudge. Okay, no such luck. I'm just going to glide past him. Whatever. I want to push into the cap and contest, because I have my smoke ready if need be. For those wondering what the incredibly ugly camo I'm using, it's Ocean Soul. You get it from the crates. It's mostly for credits and in general grinding XP faster on this line. Oh, Cleveland pushes up. And Cleveland is one of those ships you actually do quite a lot better against. Especially should they be silly enough to not angle. Okay, he's pushing aggressively towards me. He gives too much broadside though. You cannot give it. And of course there's the torpedoes. But you see how much damage I'm doing to him. Usually the problem with using AP against Cleveland on other cruiser is that you tend to get a lot of over-penetrations, which usually leads to HE being better against Cleveland than AP most of the time, simply because you get so many ridiculous over-penetrations. But of course on Royal Navy, the cruiser, the fuse on the AP shells is significantly lower, meaning the shells detonate sooner after they pass through the armor, meaning you don't suffer all those ridiculous overpens. Minikaze panicked and smoked himself up and fled, but I'm okay with that. I can just use his smoke to my advantage, and that's something I've learned to do quite a lot, and something I recommend strongly on these Royal Navy cruisers. Scavenge friendly smokes whenever you can. You are pretty much designed for playing from within smokes, so if you can find a friendly smoke so you don't have to use your own, all the better, or you get to stay longer without having to be exposed and so forth, all the better. Scharnhorst giving too much broadside, and I'm of course doing the same thing I did to the Cleveland here. Note that I am aiming higher. When you shoot battleships in general, you don't want to shoot at the hull, the straight side, because you'll just get broken or bounced shells. You want to aim right at where the superstructure starts, so you can get those penetrating hits that go land on the deck / superstructure. That's where you'll be scoring those hits. Seeing as on these Royal Navy cruisers you don't have to worry about over penetrations on the same time, so hitting the superstructure is really not a negative at all, but a consistent source of fairly good damage. The torpedoes have fairly short cooldown, so I'm just going to launch them again in case he decides to keep pushing in. This guy has no fear. I'm about to get spotted, which is of course very awkward at this point. Now, the Lander, the Fiji is a pretty much... In Fiji, you have the same turrets with the same reload, except you have 3 guns per turret. So it's pretty much a flat-out 50% damage increase. So the Fiji is significantly better at everything than the Lander is. But that doesn't mean that the Lander is really that bad, because, I mean, raw gunpowder doesn't always decide how strong of a ship is. And you do quite well against equal tiers. What you do suffer the most in Royal Navy cruisers is honestly being up-tiered. This is one of the worst ships at punching up. Before they changed the ships, they were actually very good at punching up, because they could sit in smokes and spam HE, cause fires and so forth, which made them very good at dealing with higher tier opponents. But ever since this changed to pure AP, these ships are exceptionally bad at dealing with higher tiers, which is a bit of a shame, since 0.5.9 especially fucked up T5 and T6. So in general, the Emerald I did not enjoy at all. The experience, the matchmaking, all of it was just awkward. In fact, the entire Royal Navy line until this Lander was generally not that enjoyable to me. Even now, I'm still questioning if I actually really like any of the Royal Navy cruisers. Like, somehow they all come across as a bit of a gimmicky to me, and I don't not really feeling any Royal Navy identity with these. They all just like feel like these gimmicky things that wargaming set in. They don't feel like the actual ships. Like I don't know, hard to explain. But I haven't been that impressed with the Royal Navy line in general, because it is quite frustrating to have ships, even of the same tier, simply turn their ships towards you or away from you, and suddenly have your damage get reduced to 0, and there is no actual counterplay available for you to deal with this issue. If someone decides to angle against you, well, that's it, your damage is done, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's not exactly a fun mechanic. And later on, I complimented Mirkaze, since, in case you were wondering there, I gave him a quick compliment, because his smoke, I don't know if it was actually smoking me, or smoking himself in a panic, but whatever, his smoke turned out to be very useful for me, and I got a lot of use out of it, so I gave him a quick compliment. Anyway, in general, this design, I'm not really that big of a fan of it, because it takes the decision making, it takes the performance so much out of your own hands. And later on, this Royal Navy crew, their attempts to make up for this weakness is by making the broadside damage absolutely absurd. Like, the Minotaur broadside damage is insane, it's absolutely ridiculous, but it still has the exact same weaknesses. So they're basically, instead of compensating for the weakness of like actually being able to pen ships from any angle at all, they are compensating for it by making the broadside damage absolutely absurd. And it's not really that fun of a playstyle, because you're so much at the whims of your opponent, and you rely so heavily on your opponent playing wrong. And the few times that I have faced Royal Navy cruisers, I haven't really had any fear, and they really haven't required any sort of tactical thinking when fighting these things, because all you need to know when fighting these ships is that you need to angle and you automatically counter them. And I don't think that's very engaging game mechanics. I mean, you angle and you counter them, that's it. That's how simple it is. Not exactly exciting, and I feel like VG are trying so hard to like make every line have their own thing, like their own unique identity, their own thing that they are especially good at, and that's why they pulled this whole thing out of the bag. Personally, I would have preferred to see this AP only thing on perhaps Royal Navy heavy cruisers. Maybe they would put in a heavy line of cruisers that are significantly tankier and have a longer reload, but in return they have very hard hitting shells for a cruiser, and they're AP only. That could have been an interesting style of play. But on this spam type ship, having pure AP just feels somehow fairly ridiculous. Now you've noticed, of course, very standard play what I've been doing here. I punish any cruisers that give broadside, I punish any broadsides in general. One of the biggest tips I can give in general about playing these Royal Navy ships is that you don't linger on targets. When you play other cruisers, you want to linger on targets, because you shoot one HE volley, you cause a bunch of fires, you force them to repair, and then you keep spamming HE after he's repaired, so you start another fire. That's not how you play Royal Navy cruisers, and people need to like snap out of that mentality of constantly focusing one target. You have to be a very opportune target picker. You go from target to target to target. You see one target, he gives broadside, you punish him, he starts angling, you instantly switch to the next broadside. You don't linger on single targets at all, but attempt to find the most opportune moments for you to fire at. Now, the Leander has fairly good concealment. As you can see, I'm able to sneak around fairly well. I'm not certain if this captain has 15 points yet. Not 100%. No, actually my concealment is down to 8.8, so this does definitely have 15 points by now. I'm leveling a new captain while I am leveling these ships, and in general we're testing these ships. This is of course the release version, so unlike the Fiji where I didn't have the heal, this is the actual release version of the ship, so I do have the heal available. An enemy Leander, so I smoke up earlier since he's obviously leaving his smoke, and I just start spamming it. I was about to say HE, but of course I start spamming AP. Now another issue that's not really helping the enjoyment of these Royal Navy cruisers right now is that the smoke deployment is incredibly buggy on this. Incredibly buggy. There are times when your second smoke, usually when you smoke up you get two puffs. You get one puff but right when you start your smoke, and then you get a second smoke puff right towards the end of your smoke, or the end of that 7-second window. So you have enough time to slow down within those 7 seconds to a full stop, or you will be gliding out of your own smoke. That's how it's supposed to work. But sadly, it's incredibly buggy right now, and sometimes you don't get a second puff at all, meaning you get your smoke puff, and then you keep moving forward, and the second puff doesn't deploy at all, and you're out there for the open for everyone to see, and you just get instantly deleted. And that's of course incredibly frustrating and, well, very punishing for a ship like this. I prefer to eat the one torp instead of charging out and avoiding it and potentially being absolutely wrecked by all the firepower they have on the right. But that's incredibly buggy smokes is a huge issue right now, absolutely huge issue. Sometimes you get the second puff of the smoke deploys behind your ship. Like usually the smoke puff is supposed to deploy with you in the center, like right at the moment of deployment it's supposed to pop with you right at the center. But sometimes it gets desynced or something and it actually pops up behind you. I try to angle, but of course the Gneiser now doesn't really care about the armor on this thing and punches me right in the citadel without caring about the armor. But I still have enough health to get away and behind the corner, so might maybe still turn this game around. But that bug is something I have encountered multiple times on my stream and multiple times in general. It happens on the Belfast as well, for those who are wondering. And there's actually even a thread on the EU forums, at least in the bug reporting. I think people have made a thread about it now, and there are multiple times it happened to me. It is certainly not a placebo effect or anything, it's a bug. Like some of you might be thinking that you're misplaying, that you're fucking something up, but like whoops, how did I end up outside my smoke? Did I glide or something? But no, it's a glitch. And considering how heavily these DDs rely on that smoke working, the fact that it hasn't even been tested properly and isn't even working properly right now is just, I think if anything it lends more credence to the fact that these Royal Navy cruisers were nowhere near to be near enough release. Like they had I thought the Royal Navy cruisers that we tested earlier were actually quite fun and had a lot of potential for the game, and they could have been tweaked and balanced and made really, really enjoyable. But you can see that they tried to make some panic changes to appease someone. I don't know who they're appeasing, but someone must have complained and they decided to try and change it. And they made this hack job where the lower tier cruisers, Royal Navy cruisers, are in my opinion pretty much shit. I don't enjoy playing them at all. Like none of the lower tier Royal Navy cruisers are fun. And the higher Navy cruisers all suffer from this smoke bug happening at random times. So it feels like they really and the fact of course that us community contributors, we were actually given these ships to test a day before the NDA lifted. A day. The Soviet cruisers, for example, we were given like weeks before they were even released. We had them for so long that we got bored of them before they were even released. These were released a day before to us. And when they were released a day before the actual NDA lift, it was announced in the patch notes that they will be given a heal from tier 3 to tier 7. They didn't have a heal when we had them. So they're literally like, they've been painting and putting together these cruisers days before the actual launch, and I feel like they haven't had time to test pretty much anything or foolproof anything, or like it's just a hack job that's quickly been put together, which is so silly to me because I thought the original Royal Navy cruisers were actually pretty goddamn awesome. If you want, I still have some gameplay of those old Royal Navy cruisers I could upload, and those I thought were superbly fun. And like they were strong, but they were also incredibly squishy, and they made for really interesting gameplay. But sadly, what we have now is, honestly, I'm not very satisfied with this line. I thought the German battleship line was excellent in my opinion. Multiple fun ships, a different style of ships. We got a completely new secondary ship with the Bismarck. We got this Gross Kurfürst, which is actually competitive with the Yamato. Sadly, of course, this leaves the Montana at even a weaker position, but hey, at least it's competitive with the Yamato in close range, and in brawling types it actually beats it. So the German line was pretty great, but this British line, like the Belfast, it's stupidly overpowered. I have so many people talk to me, brag about how they bought it, how they instantly like made some huge damage records or Krakens and stuff like this. Everyone seems to be absolutely loving the Belfast because it's so stupidly broken. And then we have the rest of this line, which just seems so inconsistent. There seems to be very little consistency in this entire line. And the very end game, like the Minotaur, is a hack job of, well, hope people get broadsides. If they do, you do massive damage. If they angle, you do nothing. And I don't know. I can't say been very impressed with VG this past couple of weeks, because the Belfast being released as it was in my opinion a huge mistake, and the entire Royal Navy line just reeks of incompletion. Anyway, the game ended soon after. I did, of course, over 140k damage, which is always nice. And overall, considering I'm facing T7s, it was okay, even though we didn't win. But it's still not nearly as good as the Fiji, and not nearly as good as the later tiers.